It was a hot summer afternoon, the kind where the sun hung high in the sky, and the only relief came from the shimmering blue waters of the neighborhood pool. Kids laughed, water splashed, and families lounged under umbrellas, enjoying the break from the sweltering heat. Among the families present that day was the Johnson family, Marcus, his wife Danielle, and their two children, Jaden and Ava. Excited to cool off, they entered the pool area with smiles, completely unaware that their simple outing would turn into a moment that would spark outrage, unity, and an inspiring act of community resilience. For the Johnsons, this day was meant to be a small celebration. Marcus had just completed a grueling work week, and Danielle had planned the perfect weekend getaway, a day at the local community pool followed by ice cream at their favorite shop. The children had been buzzing with excitement all morning, their swimsuits already on before breakfast. It was a moment of pure, innocent joy, the kind every family deserves to experience. As they set their belongings down on a nearby pool chair, Jaden and Ava wasted no time running toward the water. Marcus and Danielle chuckled at their enthusiasm as they settled onto their loungers. The smell of sunscreen filled the air, and the distant hum of a summer playlist added to the relaxed atmosphere. It was a picture-perfect day, until it wasn't. A figure emerged from the pool office, walking with deliberate strides toward the Johnsons. He was a middle-aged man with a stiff posture, a whistle hanging from his neck, and a deep-set scowl on his face. His name was Richard Henderson, the manager of the community pool. Though the Johnsons had never met him before, his presence would soon become impossible to forget. Henderson stopped abruptly in front of Marcus and Danielle, his shadow casting over them like a dark cloud. His eyes scanned them before landing on their children, who were laughing as they splashed each other in the shallow end. With a curt clearing of his throat, he finally spoke. "Excuse me, but do you live in this neighborhood?" His voice was firm, demanding, and above all, suspicious. Marcus and Danielle exchanged a confused glance. This wasn't an uncommon question. Many community pools required membership or proof of residency, but something about his tone sent an uneasy chill through them. Still, Marcus remained polite. "Yes, we do. We live just a few streets down," he replied, gesturing vaguely toward their home's direction. Henderson's frown deepened. "Do you have proof of residency?" Danielle raised an eyebrow. "We've been coming here for years and have never been asked that before." "New policy," Henderson said flatly, folding his arms. Marcus sighed and reached into his wallet. He pulled out his driver's license, which had their home address printed clearly on it. Henderson barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "This doesn't count," he said. "We require a utility bill or a membership ID to verify residency." Danielle scoffed. "That's ridiculous. No one else was asked for proof when we walked in." And that was the moment the mood of the afternoon shifted. Other pool-goers, some overhearing the conversation, began to glance over. A few mothers whispered amongst themselves, their faces creased with curiosity and concern. Some people noticed that Henderson had walked right past several other families, white families, without questioning them. The Johnsons weren't the only ones picking up on the blatant disparity. Still, Henderson stood his ground. "Rules are rules," he said. "If you can't provide the necessary documents, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Ava, who had been playing blissfully in the water, suddenly noticed her parents' tense expressions. She waded closer to the pool's edge, her small hands gripping the side. "Mommy? Daddy?" she called, her voice laced with uncertainty. Danielle's heart clenched. Her children didn't need to witness this. Not here. Not now. Not ever. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to keep his frustration in check. "Sir, with all due respect, we've been coming here for years. Our family is a part of this community. Why are we suddenly being asked to leave?" Henderson's response was chilling. "I don't make the rules," he said with a smirk. "I just enforce them." By now, a small crowd had gathered. Whispers turned into murmurs of discontent. Some parents shifted uncomfortably, while others shot the Johnsons sympathetic looks. A few, however, watched with thinly veiled approval, their arms crossed as if silently agreeing with Henderson's actions. Danielle clenched her fists. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, But more than that, she felt something deeper, an all too familiar ache. This wasn't just about a pool. It was about the message being sent to her children. It was about the countless other moments in their lives where they would be reminded, unfairly and unjustly, that they were different. Her thoughts were interrupted when a voice rang out. "This is wrong." It came from a young woman standing near the pool's entrance. She was in her 20s, with a toddler on her hip and a fierce determination in her eyes. "You didn't ask me or my friends for proof of residency," she pointed out, motioning toward her group. 3 white women lounging near the deep end. "Why are you only questioning them?" The murmurs grew louder. More voices joined in. "Yeah, I didn't have to show anything either. This is messed up. Leave them alone." Henderson's expression darkened. His authority was slipping. He turned back to Marcus and Danielle. "I'm not arguing about this. You need to leave. Now." Marcus looked at his wife, then at his kids, and finally at the growing number of supporters around them. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing. This wasn't over. As the Johnsons reluctantly gathered their belongings and started walking toward the exit, something remarkable began to unfold, something that would turn this moment of injustice into an inspiring act of unity. And it all started with one person speaking up. As the Johnson family walked toward the exit, the weight of what had just happened settled in. Jaden and Ava held tightly onto their parents' hands, their innocent excitement now replaced with confusion. "Why do we have to leave?" Jaden asked, his brows furrowed. "We didn't do anything wrong." Danielle's heart ached. How was she supposed to explain to her children, so young, so full of life, that sometimes the world treated people unfairly for reasons that made no sense? She squeezed his hand gently and forced a reassuring smile. "We'll talk about it later, sweetheart," she said softly, but deep inside, her frustration simmered. As they approached the gate, a voice stopped them. "Wait!" It was the same young woman who had spoken up earlier. She handed her child to a friend and hurried toward them, determination flashing in her eyes. "This isn't right. You shouldn't have to leave." More voices joined in. They were singled out. Why weren't the rest of us asked for proof? This isn't fair. Henderson's grip on his authority was slipping. His face tightened as he tried to reassert control. "This isn't a discussion. They need to leave, or I'll call security." At that moment, a man stepped forward, an older gentleman in his 60s, his silver hair neatly combed back. He wore a polo shirt with the Neighborhood Association logo embroidered on the chest. His name was Robert Whitman, one of the longest-standing members of the community board. "Richard," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I think you should reconsider what you're doing here." Henderson turned sharply. "Mr. Whitman, I'm just enforcing the rules." "What rules?" Whitman interrupted, his piercing gaze unwavering. "Because I've been a member of this community for over 30 years, and I don't recall any rule that requires families to present utility bills just to take a swim." Henderson stammered. "Well, I think you were targeting this family unfairly," Whitman stated, his voice carrying authority. "And if that's the case, then I suggest you rethink your actions before you embarrass yourself any further." By now, nearly everyone at the pool was watching. Some were nodding in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably, realizing the situation had escalated into something bigger than just one family's removal. Danielle could feel the tension in the air, but what struck her most was the way people were beginning to stand up, not just for her family, but for the principle of fairness. This wasn't just about them anymore. Henderson clenched his jaw. He looked around at the growing number of people who were now against him. His position was clear. He could either back down or push forward. Then he made a decision. "You know what?" he scoffed. "Fine, but I'll be reporting this to the board. And if you think I'm being unfair, maybe you should take a good look at who's really causing the problems in this community." His words dripped with insinuation, and everyone knew exactly what he meant. A hush fell over the crowd. Danielle felt Marcus stiffen beside her. She reached for his hand, silently pleading for him to stay calm. Whitman's expression darkened. "Richard, I think you've said enough." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Henderson turned on his heel and stormed back into the office, slamming the door behind him. A collective exhale swept through the pool area. The young woman who had first spoken up turned to Danielle. "Are you okay?" Danielle nodded, though her heart was still pounding. "Thank you for speaking up." More people approached now, offering words of support. Some apologized. Others admitted they hadn't realized discrimination like this was still happening so openly in their own neighborhood. A mother with twin boys stepped forward, her voice trembling. "I should have said something earlier," she confessed. "I saw what he was doing, and I just froze." Danielle reached out and squeezed the woman's hand. It's never too late to do the right thing. The Johnsons were still standing by the exit when another voice called out, "Don't leave." It was Whitman. He smiled warmly at them. "You belong here just as much as anyone else. Stay." For a moment, Marcus hesitated. A part of him wanted to leave, to shield his children from this moment, to walk away from the conflict. But another part of him knew that walking away meant letting people like Henderson win. Danielle met his gaze, her expression clear. "This is our home, too." He nodded. Slowly, they turned back toward the pool. Ava beamed. "Does that mean we can still swim?" Marcus chuckled. "Yeah, baby, you can still swim." Cheers erupted from the crowd as the Johnsons reclaimed their spot by the chairs. Several people clapped. It was a small victory, but an important one. However, the battle wasn't over yet. What had happened today was more than just a personal attack. It was a symptom of a deeper issue. That night, as Danielle scrolled through her phone, she noticed something. Someone had recorded the incident. The video was spreading fast, picking up thousands of views in just a few hours. Comments flooded in. "This is disgusting. That manager should be fired. I can't believe this is still happening in 2025. Where is this? People need to know." And then one comment stood out. "What can we do to help?" Danielle stared at the screen, her mind racing. Maybe this moment wasn't just about what happened at the pool. Maybe it was the start of something bigger. The video of the Johnson family's confrontation with the pool manager spread like wildfire. Overnight, it had amassed tens of thousands of views, and by morning, it was being shared by activists, influencers, and even local news outlets. The caption under most posts was simple yet powerful: "Racism in our own backyard." Danielle had barely slept. She scrolled through the endless stream of comments, each one sparking a different emotion: anger, frustration, solidarity, and, surprisingly, hope. "We need to do something about this. That manager needs to be held accountable. I live in this neighborhood. This isn't who we are. What's the community doing about this?" That last question stuck with her. What was the community doing about it? By mid-morning, her phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson. This is Lisa Ramirez from Channel 7 News. Would you be willing to speak on camera about what happened yesterday?" Danielle's stomach twisted. She had never imagined herself at the center of public attention like this. But then she glanced at her children, playing quietly in the living room, and she knew. If she didn't speak up, who would? "Yes," she said firmly. "I'd be happy to." By the afternoon, reporters had gathered outside the pool's entrance. Camera crews set up their equipment as neighbors lingered nearby, watching the growing spectacle. Some had come to show support, while others, those who preferred to keep issues like this quiet, muttered disapprovingly. Danielle and Marcus stood in front of the cameras, recounting what had happened. "We weren't the only ones at the pool," Danielle explained, "but we were the only ones asked to prove we belonged there." Marcus nodded. "We've lived in this neighborhood for years. We've paid our dues, followed every rule. So why were we suddenly treated like we didn't belong?" The reporters turned to Robert Whitman, the community board member who had spoken up the day before. He took a deep breath before addressing the crowd. "This isn't an isolated incident," he admitted. "We've had complaints about Richard Henderson before. We ignored them, and that was a mistake." A murmur rippled through the crowd. One reporter stepped forward. "What happens now?" Lisa Ramirez answered, "Well, the video has already reached over 100,000 views. People want action. The question is, what will this community do about it?" As the public pressure mounted, the Community Homeowners Association, HOA, announced an internal investigation into Richard Henderson's conduct. Over the next few days, more people came forward with their own stories. A black teenager recounted how Henderson had accused him of loitering near the pool, even though he had his membership card in hand. A Latina mother shared how she had been turned away once because her name wasn't on the system, despite providing proof. Even a white resident admitted that she had witnessed Henderson treating families of color differently, but had never spoken up out of fear of retaliation. With so many testimonials surfacing, the HOA had no choice but to act. An emergency town hall meeting was scheduled, and the entire community was invited. The topic? Discrimination at the pool. Where do we go from here? The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Neighbors filled every seat, some standing against the walls, eager to hear what would unfold. At the front of the room sat a panel of HOA members, including Robert Whitman. Richard Henderson was noticeably absent. Danielle and Marcus sat near the front, surrounded by supporters. The tension was thick in the air. Some people still believed this was all being blown out of proportion. Others were determined to ensure justice was served. The HOA president, Linda Patterson, opened the meeting. We have received multiple complaints regarding discrimination at the pool. We are here tonight to listen to the community and decide on the next steps. One by one, residents stepped forward to share their experiences. Some spoke with anger, others with disappointment. A few tried to defend Henderson, but their voices were drowned out by the overwhelming support for accountability. Then, Marcus stood up. The room quieted as he approached the microphone. I want to be clear, he said, his voice steady. This isn't about one bad employee. This is about a system that allowed this to happen in the first place. Danielle took his hand and continued. We don't want revenge. We want change. We want to make sure that no other family has to go through what we did. The crowd erupted in applause. Just as the meeting was about to conclude, a woman in the back stood up. She looked nervous but determined. My name is Sandra, she said. I used to work with Richard Henderson. Everyone turned to look at her. I quit because I couldn't stand what I saw, she admitted. I saw how he treated families of color differently. I saw him deny memberships to people who should have been allowed in. And I heard things he said when no one was around. The room held its breath. She swallowed hard before continuing. He used to say, this pool isn't for them. It's for us. A collective gasp filled the air. Linda Patterson, the HOA president, closed her eyes as if absorbing the weight of Sandra's words. When she opened them, her expression was firm. This changes everything, she said. That night, the board unanimously voted to terminate Richard Henderson's employment immediately. But for the Johnsons, the real victory wasn't just about one man losing his job. It was about what came next, a movement to ensure real change. The decision to terminate Richard Henderson sent ripples through the neighborhood. While some residents were relieved, others felt uneasy, not because they supported Henderson's actions, but because they realized something deeper. His removal didn't erase the underlying problem. The pool incident had been a wake-up call. It wasn't just about one man's bias. It was about a system that had silently allowed discrimination to persist. The very next day, Robert Whitman approached the Johnsons with an idea. We need a permanent solution, he said. Would you be willing to help us draft new community guidelines to prevent this from happening again? Danielle and Marcus exchanged a look. They hadn't expected to be pulled into neighborhood reform, but how could they say no? Of course, Danielle said. If we don't do this, who will? Together with Whitman and a few other concerned residents, they formed the Neighborhood Inclusion Committee. Their first goal? Rewrite the pool access policies to ensure no one could be unfairly targeted again. At the next HOA meeting, they presented their proposal. No family would ever be asked for extra proof beyond what was required for everyone else. Employees would be trained to recognize and prevent discrimination. Residents would have a direct line to report unfair treatment, and all complaints would require formal review. The pool would host community days where guests from outside the neighborhood could visit, ensuring a more diverse and inclusive space. The room buzzed with discussion. Some people loved the idea, while others resisted. This is unnecessary, one man scoffed. The problem was with one person, and he's gone. Marcus stood up. That's the problem. If we pretend this was just about one man, we're ignoring the bigger issue. We can either fix it now, or wait for it to happen again. His words struck a chord. After much debate, the HOA voted unanimously to approve the changes. It was official. New policies would be implemented immediately. With the new rules in place, change started happening faster than anyone expected. The first community day was held the following weekend. It was a huge success. Families from different backgrounds gathered at the pool, laughing, swimming, and enjoying the space together. Danielle watched as her kids splashed in the water alongside children they had never met before. It was a simple sight, but it meant everything. Over the next few months, the community saw real progress. Staff underwent mandatory training, learning how to recognize unconscious bias and handle conflicts fairly. Residents became more engaged, attending HOA meetings and speaking up about issues they had ignored before. More diverse families began moving in, drawn by the community's new reputation for inclusivity. Most importantly, people started holding each other accountable. No longer did they look the other way when they saw injustice. They spoke up. One evening, Danielle received a message that surprised her. It was from Sandra, the former employee who had testified at the town hall. "I just wanted to say thank you. I've been carrying guilt for so long about what I witnessed. Speaking up was the hardest thing I've ever done, but you gave me the courage to do it. I hope your family knows how much you've changed this community." Danielle's eyes welled with tears. She never set out to be an activist. She was just a mother who wanted her kids to feel safe and valued. But somehow, her family's experience had ignited a movement, one that would outlast them. The transformation wasn't just in policy. It was in hearts and minds. And that was the greatest victory of all. Months had passed since that fateful day at the pool, but its impact lingered. What started as a painful and humiliating moment had sparked a transformation in the community, one that no one could have predicted. The neighborhood had changed, and not just on paper. One afternoon, as Danielle walked past the pool with her kids, she noticed something heartwarming. Families of all backgrounds laughing and playing together. A young black father tossed his daughter into the water, while a nearby Latino family helped a little boy learn to swim. A group of teenagers, black, white, Asian, and Hispanic, sat together at the pool's edge, feet dangling in the water as they talked and joked. It was a scene that might have been impossible just months ago. Marcus nudged Danielle. "Look at that," he said softly. "It's different now." She smiled. "Because we made it different." The story of what happened at the pool had spread beyond their small community. Local newspapers had picked it up, then national outlets. People across the country resonated with the message. Emails and messages poured in from other neighborhoods facing similar struggles. "This happened in our community too. We're using your policies as a model for change. Thank you for speaking up. Your story gave us the courage to demand better. Change is possible because of people like you." Danielle and Marcus never expected to become advocates, but when they saw how their story was inspiring others, they knew they couldn't stop now. At a citywide diversity forum, they were invited to speak about their experience. Standing in front of a packed auditorium, Danielle took a deep breath and said, "What happened to us was painful, but pain can lead to change if we let it. This isn't just about a pool. It's about fairness, about belonging, about making sure our communities reflect the values we claim to stand for. And the truth is, every one of us has the power to make a difference." The room erupted in applause. As summer rolled around again, the community prepared for the grand reopening of the neighborhood pool. This time, there were no restrictions based on race or background. No unnecessary questioning at the entrance. No fear of being turned away. A new plaque was placed near the entrance, reading, "A place for everyone, because change begins with us." Danielle ran her fingers over the words, feeling a lump rise in her throat. Her kids tugged at her hands, eager to dive in. Marcus wrapped an arm around her. "We did it." She nodded. "Yeah, we did." As she watched her children jump into the water, surrounded by friends of all backgrounds, she realized this was more than just a victory. It was a new beginning.